the girl who never came home from school. The face of Lucía Álvarez, a 12-year-old girl with curly hair and a blue uniform, still seemed frozen in time in the few photos that remained taped to the walls of the small family home. In the picture, her large, calm eyes gazed at the camera as if unaware of what fate had in store for her. 15 years after her disappearance, that photo remained the center of her grandfather Don Ernesto's world, a man with trembling hands and a weary gaze who never stopped searching for her. Lucía lived in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, an area of narrow streets, dogs barking behind fences, and neighbors who seemed to know everything about everyone. Her mother worked double shifts at a factory, and her father had emigrated, so the one who truly cared for her was her grandfather, a disciplined but loving man who walked her to the corner every morning, making sure she crossed the street safely. She had a strict routine. Lucía left at 7:15 in the morning and returned home at 1:30 in the afternoon, every single time. Right across the street from Don Ernesto's house lived Julián Herrera, the neighbor who had always made him uncomfortable. Julián was a man in his 40s with no visible family, who worked seasonally and spent most of his time inside his house, a dark place with thick curtains always half closed. What bothered Don Ernesto most wasn't his silence, but the way he often caught him staring at the window where Lucía usually leaned out to comb her hair before going to school. He didn't do anything explicit, he just watched, but his gaze was long, insistent, unsettling. "I don't like the way that man looks at you," Ernesto would repeat to his daughter and to Lucía herself. "Keep your distance, do you hear me?" Lucía nodded, sometimes amused, sometimes bored by her grandfather's warnings. To her, Julián was just another odd neighbor, someone to ignore. The day of her disappearance began like any other Monday. Lucía put on her blue uniform, styled her curly hair with a white headband, and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. Don Ernesto waited for her at the door with his cane and walked her to the corner, as always. He kissed her forehead and watched her walk away, her backpack swinging on her back. Just a few steps further on, Lucía turned and waved, a final casual goodbye that would be etched in her grandfather's memory. But that was the last time he saw her. 1:30 passed, so did 1:45. At 2 Don Ernesto began pacing nervously in the hallway of the house. He called the school, but the secretary told him that Lucía had left at the regular time with her classmates. She was supposed to have arrived long ago. The grandfather felt a knot in his stomach. He grabbed his cane and went out into the street. He searched the route Lucía took every day, asked neighbors, and went into corner stores and small businesses. No one had seen her after school. As the minutes ticked by, the calm of the neighborhood began to break. Her mother left her emergency job and joined the search. Neighbors scattered through the streets calling her name. Only Julián, the neighbor, didn't leave his house. The curtains remained drawn, but Don Ernesto would later swear he felt eyes watching from inside. That same afternoon, the family filed a missing person report. The police arrived in the neighborhood, took statements, and asked the routine questions. They retraced the route between the school and home, spoke with classmates and teachers. "She probably ran away with a friend," one of the officers murmured, underestimating the terror growing in Don Ernesto's heart. Lucía wasn't impulsive. She wasn't a troublemaker. She had no reason to run away. The following days were hell. Search parties were organized, flyers with her picture were distributed, and photos were broadcast on the local news. The neighborhood became a constant scene of sirens, whispers, and pitying glances. Even so, not a single solid lead surfaced. In the midst of this chaos, Don Ernesto couldn't stop thinking about the neighbor. He remembered every time he had caught him looking at Lucía, every time he had seen him react with discomfort when she passed by his door. So one afternoon, overcome by anguish, he crossed the street and knocked on his door. Julián took a while to open the door. When he finally did, he looked sleepy, as if he'd been woken from a nap. His house smelled damp and musty. "Have you seen my granddaughter?" Ernesto asked bluntly, showing a photo of Lucía. "No, Don Ernesto," Julian replied, barely glancing at the photo. "I wish I could help." His voice was flat and distant. The grandfather noticed a slight tremor in his hands, but he couldn't tell if it was nervousness or simply the discomfort of the moment. When the police went house to house, they also knocked on Julian's door. They searched briefly, asked questions, and checked his alibi. He said that he had been working at a mechanic's shop on the other side of town that day and had returned that evening. The shop confirmed that he had spent part of the day there, and that was enough for the officers to shift their focus to other lines of investigation. Months turned into years. Lucia's case faded from the news. The posters wore down under the rain and sun. Only in Don Ernesto's house did time seem to stand still. His room filled with newspaper clippings, notes and maps marked with routes and schedules. Every so often, the investigators reopened the case, reviewed the information, but nothing new emerged. For most, it was just another unsolved case. For the grandfather, it was an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. His relationship with his daughter also fractured. Unable to bear the pain, she tried to move on, to rebuild her life with silence as her only defense. She blamed the country's insecurity, the negligence of the authorities, fate itself. Ernesto, on the other hand, focused all his suspicion on a single figure, the neighbor. "That man knows something," he repeated over and over. "I know it. I feel it in my bones." But he never had proof, only hunches. 15 years later, the neighborhood had changed. New businesses, remodeled houses, different children playing in the street. Julian still lived there, older, quieter. Don Ernesto now walked with a sturdier cane and a more frail body, but his gaze still fixed on the house across the street, as if it were a wall that sooner or later would confess something to him. It was then that a young detective, Carla Morales, entered the scene. Newly arrived at the cold case unit, she found Lucia's file in a box full of forgotten folders. The first thing that struck her was the girl's photo. Blue uniform, serious eyes, a calm expression. Something in that gaze made her stop. Carla asked to review all the case material, the statements, the search records, the reports. She realized that despite the initial efforts, there were many things that hadn't been explored in depth. She decided to reopen the investigation. What she didn't know was that, by touching that file, she was also going to awaken the ghosts of the neighborhood. One morning, Carla called Don Ernesto's house to interview him. The grandfather, surprised that someone was interested in the case again after so many years, agreed immediately. The detective listened to him for hours, taking notes as he recounted, almost with surgical precision, every moment of the day of the disappearance. But it was when he mentioned Julian and the suspicion he had always silently carried that the atmosphere in the room seemed to change. "I never trusted him," Ernesto said, his voice breaking. "He was always looking at Lucia, always, and no one wanted to listen to me." Carla underlined the neighbor's name in her notebook. Even though the case was 15 years old, one thing was clear. If there was even the slightest chance of uncovering the truth, she had to start there. What no one imagined was that, by pulling on that seemingly frayed thread, they would end up finding something that had been hidden for years, just a few meters from where everyone had been searching. The neighbor's basement detective Carla Morales left Don Ernesto's house with her head full of details. Schedules, names, small inconsistencies in the original case. But above all, she carried the weight of a grandfather's testimony, a man who had never stopped suspecting the man who lived across the street. It wasn't proof, but it was a starting point. The first thing she did was review Julian Herrera's old statements. The file showed that he had said he had been working all day at a mechanic's shop and had only returned at night. The shop's log confirmed his presence, but something caught Carla's attention. There was no exact record of the time he left, or if he was absent at any point. Back then, those details seemed unimportant. Now, however, they looked like glaring gaps. Carla decided to visit the shop. The business was still open, though with a different owner. The former owner, she was told, was retired. The detective got his address and went to see him. The elderly man, with motor grease still clinging to his hands, vaguely recalled the case. "Yes, I remember that boy, Julian," he said thoughtfully. "He came some days, did good work, but wasn't a regular. That day," he frowned. "To be honest, I couldn't swear he stayed the whole time. So many people come and go from the shop."
That answer wasn't enough to incriminate anyone, but it did reveal something important. Julian's alibi wasn't as solid as it had seemed before. Now it was officially an open line of investigation. With this new understanding, Carla requested authorization to question Julian again, and if she found sufficient evidence, to obtain a search warrant for his house.
It wasn't easy to convince her superiors to invest resources in such an old case, but the detective knew that missing children deserve every effort, no matter how small. Finally, she got the go-ahead. When Carla knocked on Julian's door, she felt the entire neighborhood hold its breath. Some neighbors peeked discreetly out of their windows, others pretended to sweep the sidewalk. He opened it with almost calculated slowness. He had more gray hair, his skin weathered, but his gaze was still shifty. "Mr. Herrera, I'm Detective Morales," she said, showing her ID. "I'm reopening the case of Lucía Álvarez's disappearance. I need to ask you a few questions." He hesitated, looked around as if searching for an invisible exit, and finally stepped aside to let her in. The interior of the house was dark, filled with old furniture and smelling of damp. There was a thick silence, as if no one had spoken there in years. The interview began with basic questions: where he lived back then, if he remembered anything about the day of the disappearance, if he knew the girl beyond a casual greeting. Julian answered with short, sometimes evasive sentences, insisting that he knew nothing and that he had already told the police everything years before. "Has anyone else moved into this house since then?" Carla asked, observing the yellowed walls. "No. I've always lived alone," he replied. It was then that the detective noticed something. A door in the hallway, half hidden behind a small wardrobe. It didn't have the typical layout of the rooms. It was narrower, lower. A door that, at first glance, many would overlook. "What's in there?" she asked, pointing. "Just an old basement," Julian replied immediately. "Nothing important. It's full of junk." His quick, defensive tone set off an internal alarm in Carla. She couldn't search the house without a warrant, but she could observe his body language. Her hands trembled slightly, her eyes avoided direct eye contact. The detective mentally registered all of this. At the end of the interview, Carla didn't have conclusive proof, but she did have enough leads to take the next step. With the unit's support, she requested a search warrant for the house, citing inconsistencies in the alibi and its direct proximity to the girl's disappearance. After hours of paperwork and review, the judge authorized it. The next day, the neighborhood awoke to the sound of patrol cars pulling up in front of Julian's house. Don Ernesto, from his doorway, watched as uniformed officers escorted the detective. His heart pounded. He didn't know whether to feel hope or fear. After 15 years, they were going to enter the place he had always wanted them to look. "Mr. Herrera," Carla announced, showing the warrant, "we have authorization to search the house. We ask for your cooperation." Julian tried to object, muttering about his rights and his privacy, but the officer's presence and the legal document in the detective's hand left him no choice. He stepped aside, his shoulders slumped. The search began in the living room, then the bedrooms, then the kitchen. They found dust, old objects, nothing particularly relevant. But Carla's unease persisted. Her steps eventually led her to the same hallway door she had seen the day before. When they finally opened it, a thick, cold and damp air billowed from the stairs leading down to the basement. With flashlights in hand, the detective and two officers cautiously descended. There were boxes, broken furniture, and rusted tools. A hanging spotlight barely illuminated the center of the room. It was one of the officers who spotted it first. A clear plastic box, sealed with tape, half hidden behind an old wardrobe. Inside, carefully folded, was a very familiar blue garment. Carla felt a lurch in her chest. She ordered all unnecessary movement to stop and demanded that the forensics team come down immediately. No one touched the box until the scene was documented. When the experts, wearing gloves, removed the lid, they confirmed everyone's fears. It was a girl's school uniform with the same design as the school Lucía attended. Next to it were a white headband and a backpack, also blue, with faded children's patches. The silence that followed was deafening. Upon learning of the discovery, Don Ernesto covered his face with his hands. He didn't need to see the clothes up close to know they belonged to his granddaughter. It was as if time had been shattered. Suddenly, everything he had felt for years, his intuition, his fear, his distrust of the neighbor, materialized in that basement. Julian was immediately arrested for questioning as a suspect. In the interrogation room, under the harsh, direct white light, the mask of security he had built up over the years began to crack. First, he denied that the clothes belonged to Lucía. Then he said he'd found them lying in the street sometime after her disappearance and, fearing blame, had stored them in the basement. That explanation, however, didn't fit with the fact that the clothes were clean, folded, and perfectly preserved. "Why did you keep them for 15 years?" Carla asked him. "Why didn't you ever say anything if you really wanted to help?" Julian didn't know what to say. He stammered, changed his story, contradicted himself. Every word he uttered only made things worse. Even so, the detective knew that however suspicious he seemed, she needed more than a hunch to close a case. The experts performed forensic tests on the clothes, looking for biological traces, fiber fragments, any clue that could connect the find to Julian or to whatever had happened to Lucía. They also revisited the neighborhood, interviewing residents who, as time passed, became more willing to talk. Some confessed that they had always felt something strange about him, that they saw him loitering around the school for no apparent reason, that he sometimes stood on the corner right at dismissal time. Others remembered hearing noises in his basement on nights when he supposedly wasn't home. They were small details, fragments of memory that at the time seemed insignificant, but that now fit together like pieces of a sinister puzzle. The lab results took weeks to arrive, but when they finally did, they confirmed that the uniform and the objects found undoubtedly belonged to Lucía. Some fibers found on the clothing matched materials from inside Julian's house, reinforcing the suspicion that the girl had been inside that house at some point. The prosecution filed formal charges against him based on the discovery of the clothing, the inconsistencies in his alibi, and the neighbors' testimonies. Although it wasn't possible to reconstruct exactly what had happened that day, the case made one thing clear. Lucía. She most likely never left her neighborhood. She disappeared just a few meters from her home, on a street everyone considered safe. The trial was closely followed by the media. Without showing morbid or graphic details, the news reports told the story of the missing girl and the grandfather who never stopped suspecting his neighbor. The image of Lucía in her blue uniform and with her calm gaze reappeared on the screens, this time accompanied by the word her family had waited for years: justice. For Don Ernesto, however, the relief was bittersweet. Knowing they had found a key piece of the mystery brought him some peace, but it also reopened old wounds. Lucía wasn't back. The years of silence, the sleepless nights, weren't erased. All he could do was cling to the idea that his granddaughter, wherever she was, finally had a truth told in her name. Detective Carla Morales, for her part, closed the case with a complex feeling, satisfaction at having taken a decisive step in a forgotten case, but also with the awareness that no verdict can turn back time. However, Lucía's story served a purpose beyond that. It spurred the unit to revisit other old cases with fresh eyes, to listen again to families who felt ignored. In the neighborhood, Julian's house stood empty. The curtains no longer concealed viewers. The basement was sealed off after the investigation. And every time someone passed by Don Ernesto's house, they saw the same old photo on the wall. A 12-year-old girl in a blue uniform with curly hair, looking at the camera with a mixture of innocence and resolve. That image became a silent reminder that even though time passes and voices fade, the truth can still wait. Until someone decides to listen. 15 years missing. A grandfather who never gave up. And a neighbor whose basement finally revealed the secret the neighborhood had been afraid to admit. That's the story that, told with respect and without sensationalism, can reach millions of people on YouTube. Not just as a tale of mystery and pain, but as a call to pay attention to the signs, to listen to the victims and their families, and to never let any case be forgotten.